So hopefully those were some interesting conversations in the breakouts, and you can put some of that to use when you get back into the office and follow development for your groups as we go through the year. So now we're in the home stretch of decisions. Been a great couple of days. We'll do a brief wrap-up of the sessions after our next and final speaker. Steve has joined us. He's VP and General Manager of Kantar's Campaign Media Analysis Group here in DC. And he's going to give us a taste of what's to come in terms of 2019 predictions. We'll have time for a brief Q&A if you've got questions as well. So do use Slido all over again, and I'll jump back on. But Steve, welcome to the stage. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And on behalf of those of us who actually live here in the DC area, we're always happy to see tourist dollars, and we think it's a great idea when you get a chance to come here and visit your money. And as you can tell, there's a little bit of it around here. We've been joking that the state bird of the District of Columbia is now the construction crane, there's pretty good reason for that. So this afternoon, we're just going to take a few minutes, go through some predictions that we've made in the media division of Kantar as we get into 2019. So let me tell you a little bit about Kantar and the media division of Kantar, noticing not to say Kantar Media, because I'm not allowed to say that anymore after last week's announcement, but roughly 6,000 people. We measure media all over the world. Here in the United States, we serve 4 million brands and 27 different media. Diverse range of clients, brands, agencies, media owners, all included in that group. And in probably one of the more self-serving comments, since I have the option and the opportunity of running the political ad intelligence unit here in DC, we are the leader in political ad intelligence as well. So these media predictions come from a couple of different sources. One is our analysts getting together and coming up with what they believe is going to happen, and the other is the Dimensions study, which I believe is in its second year, where we interview 5,000 consumers and we talk to industry leaders to try to come up and project what's happening in the media world. And these days, that's a little trickier than it used to be. So let's roll into the predictions. Number one, Amazon. You may have heard of them, small little Seattle company. Guy owns a newspaper here in the District of Columbia and is about to bring 400 million jobs to DC through HQ2. But in all seriousness, when you look at Amazon and you look at the scope of Amazon and what they do, they are an amazing company. While they have certainly had their roots in e-commerce, we all know over the course of the last several years, they've been really heavily moving into content and do a great job of that. And with Amazon Prime, you have the opportunity to experience the entire Amazon experience. Talk about getting your hands on useful data, right? These guys, with as many people as buy on this platform, the amount of data they get is absolutely staggering, and they can see it from start to finish, which according to our slide here, gives them a tremendous advantage. House brands, wow. You have to expect somebody like Amazon is using house brands. They're heavily promoting their house brands, and you would sort of expect that to happen. But here's the thing, if you are a regular retailer and you're on the Amazon platform, you're going to find yourself, according to the Kantar e-commerce insights, you're going to find yourself competing with those house brands when the search results come up. Their own house brands, in a lot of cases you can see here, are showing up at the top of the sponsored listing, sponsored products category, shows up everywhere. So they're doing a really great job. Not quite so sure how people that aren't an Amazon house brand feel about that, but this is the reality of the situation if you're depending on that Amazon platform to help you move product. Back to the big screen. I've always kind of wondered about this because there's the big screen and the experience on the big screen. It would seem to make sense that we're moving back here. 96% of our consumers, nearly 100%, are watching the big screen. A majority doing that more than several times a day. By comparison, the Rokus and the Xboxes and all the kind of over-the-top connected TV platforms, 63%. I don't know if you guys saw the study that came out this week that said we actually now have more people streaming than we do subscribing to cable. That's a first, and that's just a sign of the times as to where we are. Ads on linear TV. I know this is probably a subject that interests a lot of you in this room. Consumers are, pretty much okay with getting ads in their content on television, but obviously sometimes when it comes to the notion of getting it on streaming video, there's a lot less enthusiasm. Not surprisingly, that seems to be the case. Linear TV, there's a lot of talk about linear TV's demise. As a guy that spent several years in the TV business at one time, it's hard to hear that sometimes, but linear TV continues to hang on stubbornly and is probably the only way really out there anymore to reach a mass audience. So what we know is consumers are mixing traditional and digital media usage in their media habits. Right, 52% are paying for a subscription. 22%, whether it's Spotify or Pandora, are listening to some sort of audio or music service. And, the numbers below, newspapers and magazines, clearly this is probably not a surprise to anybody that's been following things. Obviously, these things are not quite so good, but when you look at the digital alternatives to those newspapers and magazines, there seems to be an awful lot of enthusiasm for what's going on there. The video saga moves on, right? I mean, video is, clearly in the early years of existence was a pretty blunt instrument. It was sort of one to everyone. Now we're getting into a place where it's a lot easier to personalize that, much easier to deliver a more targeted message using video. And, I think the one universal truth in media is that video works. And no matter where you place it, video always seems to have a certain resilience and impact from it. These days, the old days, and being the political guy at Kantar, we see this a lot in digital where a candidate or someone will just take and reuse a 30-second ad and they'll use it in an online video platform. And generally, we don't think that's good practice, especially in this day and age. So when you look at this, you also have to be careful about the amount of ads that we serve in video. There's maybe a little bit of a worry that we're going to saturate audiences a little bit too much with it, which is not something that they obviously, previous slide, that's not something that they're terribly enthusiastic about. These days, there are so many different ways to reach the consumer that you clearly, it's in everyone's best interest to diversify to the extent that you can. Video ad clutter, I think that's pretty obvious. This is something that, this quote here, you can see over the course of time that the amount of people using ad blockers all the time are just a little bit under 50%. A little bit of growth from 2017 to 2019. But still, you consider those that always use one and those that occasionally use one, you're running numbers up here, right around 79, 80%. AI and automation. Hey, I don't know if you guys heard today, McDonald's is going to algorithm us through the drive-thru. That's going to be an interesting one. But there's clearly this move with machine learning and artificial intelligence and the ability of it to be able to look through data sets to find inaccuracies so that targeting gets more sophisticated and hopefully much more effective. These technologies are going to play a role here, and it's clear that we're in kind of the early days of this refinement, but with these technologies in place, we clearly have a much brighter future in front of us when it actually comes to serving an ad to a person who's actually interested in that ad based on what we know about them. To that end, consumers and relevance. Now, it's always interesting because we hear how much about consumers are interested in privacy and not getting their data out. Yet when you do surveys like this, it is kind of remarkable to look at the number of people who actually do like the fact that even though behind the scenes they may not know what's going on, clearly they're being targeted and they appreciate more relevant advertising that gets served to them as opposed to the, kind of spray and pray stuff that has come up in previous generations. So interesting, 61% say that they're very much interested in ads that are relevant to their particular interests. So now there's this old notion that says, you may not be interested in politics, but politics is always interested in you. And to that end, last year in the midterms, and as you guys look and try to sort of figure out what impact political advertising is going to have on the ad ecosystem this year and particularly next year, last year was a record. Almost, a little over $3 billion in broadcast. Cable, local cable, despite all the talk about cord cutters and cord nevers and cord shavers, actually doubled what it did in 2014. It's now at $1.2 billion. And digital, which was $250, $300 million in 2014, somewhere between $1.2 billion and $1.5 billion. So clearly you can see which direction the political world is going. This was an all-time record for a midterm, not surprisingly. And a lot of broadcasters that had to take sharp objects out of their office drawers in 2016, with the presidential election being sort of the non-event spending-wise, they all got a lot more happier last year. They were a lot easier to talk to, I might add. So what happens next year? Clearly the wild card is the presidential race. The Trump people, who probably now feel that they've got a little wind in their sails after having this Mueller summary report come out on Sunday, they know that they can't do what they did they can't do what they did in 2016. There's a big difference between being an insurgent and being an incumbent. The incumbent part means that they're going to have to run what is a more traditional campaign. Now bear in mind, the person that is running the Trump campaign is Brad Parscale. Parscale is a digital native. And when you look back at 2016, the Trump campaign was spending anywhere between 30 to 40% of their budget on digital, particularly Facebook. I mean, the Trump people did a marvelous job of using Facebook. It's probably the story of the 2016 election. But how the presidency works, how the campaign spends is really going to determine how good, if you're a media owner, how good or how bad the cycle is. On the Democratic side, we're up to what, 350, 400 candidates? It just seems that way. But the truth of the matter is there is going to be immense pressure to win early. The way the Democrats have set up the primary next year, moving California forward the way it has, there is clearly a move underfoot to get this over and not have it go into June as it did in 2016. There's going to be, so Iowa, New Hampshire, all the way up to Super Tuesday. Today is what, March 26th? By this time next year, this thing might, the primary on the Democratic side, could almost be over or might be over. Because if you don't win in Iowa, you don't win in New Hampshire, you don't win in South Carolina, the money's going to dry up. And when that happens, campaigns tend to shrivel pretty quickly. How much do advertisers get, non-political advertisers get shut out here? There will probably be some key states. I don't know that Las Vegas will be $4,000 a rating point in October like it was last year, which is just insane. But there are some states where it probably sets up a little better. Arizona, for one. Arizona is going to get contested heavily in the presidential race. If you sort of figure that Nevada is really not a battleground state anymore, Arizona sort of becomes the new Nevada. Georgia, depending on what happens with the Senate race in Georgia, if Stacey Abrams is on the ballot for senator, watch out. That could be interesting. Trump did not win Georgia by very much in 2016. That could be an interesting one to watch. North Carolina, I don't know if any of you noticed, but Priorities USA, which is Hillary Clinton's PAC, said, you know what, we're not going to spend any money in Ohio in 2020. Now, as a native Buckeye, I find it interesting that my home state may no longer be considered a battlefield state by one of the major political parties, but that money is going to go to Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. They're going to try to rebuild the blue wall that Trump did a pretty good job of knocking down in 2016. Just sort of a case study here. This was Iowa in 2016. This was obviously more on the Republican, you know, where there was a robust Republican primary, there was a decent Democratic primary as well. 45% of the advertising was political. It probably just seemed like more. In 2016, by the end of April, 96% of the spending had happened, and that's what happens, you know, the campaigns kind of winnow out. Super Tuesday is March 3rd. 13 states, 7 of the top 10 markets in the country. Will be interesting to watch to see how much this determines who the nominees are. I don't think Mr. Trump, given recent events, Bill Weld isn't going to bother Donald Trump at all. The governor of this state was thought to be interested, but I sort of get the feeling he won't be after this announcement. But the Democratic primary could get very, very, very interesting. So needless to say, these are interesting times we live in, and so much of what is sort of guarded, you know, the rules in media were for a long time rather set, and they stayed the same for a long time, and if there's anything that's happening today, it's kind of clear that the rules are kind of being written and rewritten almost on a monthly basis, it seems. And within that, there's plenty of risk, and there's also plenty of opportunity to really do things that are exciting and new and different. And, you know, probably the only thing that limits that is a client's budget and your imagination, right? But these are, you know, these are our thoughts on things that you want to look for, or we believe you want to look for in 2019. And with that, I thank you very much. I know I'm standing between you and your trains and your airplanes. So thanks again for having me, and have a great one. Thank you.